We're about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriornews.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back. It's Warrior Creed with me, the radical Maajid Nawaz, and my brother, as always, the infamous Usman Raja. Today, Usman, bro, we're going to speak a bit about the return of Nazism. I don't know if you caught it, but in Florida, a whole bunch of Azov battalion supporting Red Blood, as they called themselves, Nazis, decided to demonstrate in public and perform a whole bunch of Sieg Heils and what have you. Now, I've got a few things to get through with regards to that topic. And then we're going to discuss a bit about anti-Semitism and the ADL and Twitter and Elon Musk because of last week's show. There's been some developments on the conversation we had around that. If you recall, we spoke a bit about the ADL pressuring Twitter to shadow ban, and that story that we were covering last week has grown since then as well. But let's kick off on the neo-Nazi story. And I want to begin by referencing Laura Loomer, who is a independent journalist that works based in and around Florida, because a lot of the interesting videos that I'm going to show you come from news that she's broken. And the first point is, have a look at this. This is what she's written on her page. Exclusive video, which I'll show you in a moment. I have exclusively obtained video evidence and police body camera footage of a police officer in Escambia County, Florida, by the name of Deputy Kay Haley, badge number 614272, interacting with CIA, FBI, Nazi asset, and Azov battalion fighter Kent Boneface McClellan. Now, who she's talking about is all those Nazis we saw in the video. So I'm going to play you this bunch of Nazis that came out on the streets of Florida. Here they are.
Going on right now. Are you going to vote in 2024? What do you think is going to happen with
My vote is useless. I think Biden's better than Trump because he sends rockets to Ukraine.
In support of Ukraine, you mean?
Hell Ukraine. Hell Azov.
Christopher, there's a...
Now, these are the guys that protested in Florida. And I'm going to play it one more time and ask everybody to focus on the guy that walks behind the spokesperson, the man with his entire face tattooed, because that's Boneface. That's who we just showed you Laura Loomer was speaking about, saying that she has exclusive footage that outs him as somebody already on the CIA and FBI's databases as an asset, and has video of him admitting that the CIA sent him to Ukraine to join the Nazi Azov battalion. So before I get to that footage, where the exclusive footage that Laura Loomer broke and that I'm going to show you, we're going to show you the video you just saw again. So because I've just identified the guy I'm going to ask you all to focus on. And that guy is the guy that walks behind the spokesperson. He's the CIA asset that we're now about to reveal with what Laura Loomer broke. But before we get to that video again, this is the from Laura Loomer's page, and that's the claim being made. You can see it there, and the guy is Kent Boneface McClellan. That's who I'm going to show you again now with a full face tattoo in this video. Have a watch. And keep in mind, obviously, the main spokesman is doing Sieg Heil to the Azov, which he pronounces Azov, right at the end in this video. And he also says Sieg to Ukraine as well. You'll catch that right at the end. But watch out for the man with a full face tattoo that walks behind him as he's speaking.
Going on right now. Are you going to vote in 2024? What do you think is going to happen with
My vote is useless. I think Biden's better than Trump because he sends rockets to Ukraine.
In support of Ukraine, you mean?
Hell Ukraine. Hell Azov.
Christopher, there's a...
So hopefully there you saw him again, bro. That's the guy there, the full tattoo face that walked behind the spokesperson there for Red Blood, and that was the protest in Florida. Now I'm going to show that specific footage that Laura Loomer on her page on the platform formerly known as Twitter has claimed is the following. Again, one more time to show you the description. She's saying that this is exclusive video evidence and police body camera footage of a police officer in Escambia County, Florida, by the name of Deputy Kay Haley, badge number 614272, interacting with CIA, FBI, Nazi asset, and Azov battalion fighter Kent Boneface McClellan. So now we're going to show you 2 minutes or so of that police body camera footage, and you'll hear in this footage, what you're about to hear is the police officers, when they read his name on the system, state explicitly that they're told that he's in a terrorist organization, but they should contact Border Patrol and the FBI. Then they say on the video that that's what they're going to have to do. This guy's an asset. It's as plain as day. Have a look at this.
They saw. So we think that's his real name. I'm gonna look him up. I put in Kent. I played with Kent and nothing came up when I looked it up the first time. I haven't tried to track him down. Have you ever been in trouble in Escambia County before? No, sir. Ordered a plan. What I said. I'm way black. Yeah, I'll get that one. You know your driver's license number? No, sir. Not. Spell your last name. MC. First name? N. Middle name? Ryan, sir. Birthday? April 22nd, 1990. Of what? April 22nd, 1990. What was the other thing? Terrorist organization number. Never seen that one before. It says the contact the screening center. Oh yeah, my bad. You've never seen that before. I've never seen it either. Arms, dangerous, violent tendencies. Civilian. You got Border Patrol's phone number on this. What's that? You got Border Patrol's phone number on this. Really? Are you from Ukraine? Let's get back to you, sir. That's the contact FBI. We're in Canada. We'll do it. Well, that escalated from a... We're going to be calling... Technically... Border Patrol, we're going to call... FBI. Technically...
So there on the system, as you saw, he just says, I've returned from Ukraine. And the police are instructed on the details that come up when they put his name in there. I don't know why that stop came about, but they clearly stopped him. The police are instructed to contact Border Patrol and the FBI if he's stopped, which is what they subsequently said on camera they were going to do. Now, the final, if you like, cream on this particular piece of pudding that I'm trying to present is the man himself on camera, pretty much directly stating that it's the CIA that sent him out to Ukraine.
There's a lot of hype about the FBI sending me over there, but that's not the FBI that does that. It was Central Intelligence that got me involved in that. There's a lot.
Central Intelligence. Now, what this demonstrates is that we've got a situation that we're, as the public, being asked to support a war in Ukraine that directly involves supporting the Azov Nazi battalion. I don't think there's any longer any doubt, just in case but people of the last 3 years have been trying to deny Azov are Nazis even. When you see those chaps there in Florida calling themselves Red Blood, I don't think there's any longer any doubt that these people went to join the Azov battalion and they found kinship in their fellow Nazis in Azov. I don't think it is any longer even for the full-hearted to try and defend the fact that Azov are not Nazis. It's clear as day. And now what's become very clear is that we've had a policy not only of encouraging the war that establishes in Ukraine these Nazis as an official battalion in the Ukrainian armed forces, serving officially, mind you, as the Ukrainian National Guard. And we're being asked, while we can't heat and eat in our own homes, to fund that war. That's one thing. The other thing, though, in addition to it, is where specifically it appears selecting our own citizens, our security services are, and sending them to join the most extreme Nazi radicalized elements of that war. For what purposes is the question that comes to mind. And what I'd like to remind everyone at this stage again is this is something we've been warning about for a long time, because whenever a government has this policy of directly supporting radicalization abroad, it has blowback, and it comes back home. And we've seen, Osman, you and I, with our work in terrorism, we've seen this blowback story multiple times. I'm going to remind everybody at this stage, about 2 years ago, what the alarm bells that we were trying to raise on specifically on this subject of what the consequences of our support for the war in Ukraine would lead to. And this is me on the Tim Pool show, on Timcast, attempting to raise the alarm now that obviously we see the alarm bells should by now be ringing loud and clear. But this is 2 years ago when people were still waking up to this challenge. Some people say, look, your country's been invaded. Everyone should fight. We don't care if they're Nazis. And my point is, every country has racists, and every country has Nazis, and every country has jihadist extremists. But if you organize them into a formal battalion, that's the equivalent. So the analogy is false there with saying every country has racists. The equivalent analogy is the US Armed Forces having a formal KKK battalion with KKK flags as part of the army. That's the analogy, right? It's shocking. If the US did that, if the UK did that, people would be up in arms, but we're funding it in Ukraine.
And how come many of these woke YouTubers and personalities who have no problem, in fact, monetize attacking Nazis, are now very much in favor of our support of these groups in Ukraine?
But right, so listen, promoting a white man at work is deemed racist, but literally funding an actual Nazi armed battalion is fine.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, so they say. I'm not a fan of that ideology.
Well, no, if they're going to say that, then I'm going to hold them to their word and say, so why is it wrong to fund ISIS in Syria and go and join them? We've got UK media calling for British citizen volunteers to go and join the Foreign Legion in Ukraine and join these people. So hang on a minute. So when young Muslim men went to join ISIS in Syria, that's terrorism, but you can go and join a Nazi brigade in Ukraine.
It's because public perception. They look, ISIS somehow managed to get, I think the famous image was like a Detroit plumbing company pickup truck in Syria or whatever. And everyone's like, how did they get this? Yeah. How were these weapons being given to many of these rebel groups, ultimately then, becoming ISIS?
Now, to sum all this up for you, you can see now clearly the link between the Red Blood protesters calling themselves Red Blood in Florida just now and the Boneface character having CIA links sending him to join Azov in Ukraine. You can see the fact by now, hopefully it's very clear, that Azov themselves are a Nazi battalion. Now, you can also see the fact is we had an official policy of encouraging all that. What I'm now going to show is the final element of this opening monologue, and that is that the consequences are actual and real death. And that's what I'm going to show you now, based upon this article that Radical Media published a while back, Lower Energy Bills or Funding Zelensky, which would you prefer? That's from, you can see the date there, September the 4th, 2022. And in that article, we reference the following, and that is, let me begin by reminding everybody that there was a time, which you may or may not remember, but NATO posted in their officially verified Twitter handle an image of a Ukrainian female soldier who they were hailing on International Women's Day as a hero. And here's the tweet, which NATO had to subsequently delete. And it says, this International Women's Day, we think of the remarkable women of Ukraine. Their strength, bravery, and resilience are symbolic of the spirit of their nation. You can see the date there at the bottom, March the 9th, 2022. By the way, this tweet is now deleted, but it's a NATO tweet. I took this screen grab myself, so I can promise everybody that that is a NATO tweet. Now, what I'm showing you is that the image in the top left of that woman, I'm now going to show you another screen grab. This is of mine at the time with a zoom in of that image of the woman. And there's the close-up. You can see that's my tweet. You can see the date at the bottom there, still March 2022. And you can see me saying at the top there, here's a close-up. And what you're looking at in that close-up, right in the middle of the image, is a beige brownie patch on the Velcro. And that's a black sun patch. Now, that black sun is the symbol that the Nazis in the Azov battalion have appropriated. They've appropriated that black sun symbolism, but from there, it's spread. Now, what we're going to demonstrate is our support for Azovs in Ukraine and our funding of that war has led to death and murder in America, in the United States of America. Here is the New York Post reporting on the Buffalo shooter, Peyton Gendron. Now, look at the date there. You can see it. That's 2022. At the bottom of the tweet there. And now look again at the top left of the image. And you can see that there's a little icon inside the image next to his face, top left by his forehead. In that icon, you can see a circular white rune. That is the black sun symbol. Because this Buffalo shooter, which was the worst racist shooting in US history, was inspired directly by Azov and the black sun symbolism. And the Independent newspaper reported at the time, 10 people are dead and a suspect is in custody after a gunman with a rifle and body armor opened fire at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York on the 14th of May, believed to be one of the deadliest racist massacres in recent American history and the deadliest mass shooting in the US in 2022. That guy that did that, as the Independent just reported, you can see the black sun symbolism, top left there, the white rune, that's the black sun symbol. That was adorning his white supremacist manifesto, right? So now you know, NATO posted a symbol of a Ukrainian Azov battalion female fighter. When they were caught doing it on International Women's Day, they deleted the tweet, but I've just shown you the tweet and can verify, having taken that image myself, that was the NATO tweet. That same black sun symbolism ended up in the manifesto of the Buffalo neo-Nazi shooter in the worst racist shooting in US history. Now we're going to go to the Christchurch Mosque massacre in New Zealand, where multiple Muslims were gunned down in prayer in that mosque. The Christchurch shooting, this is from ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, official ABC Australian News. There's the headline. You can look at all the particulars there, the dates on this screen grab for you. And the headline says, the Christchurch shooting, Eastern Europe's far right and a cherry-picked reading of history. The Christchurch Mosque massacre in New Zealand, if you remember it, it was a terrible massacre. That's a quote from the article I've just shown you. I'm going to read it for you. It says, Ukraine is home to a resurgent far right that uses the same symbolism as the Christchurch shooter, but it hasn't been mentioned much over the past few weeks. Ukraine is home to the Azov movement, a far right movement originally formed in 2014 as the Azov battalion to fight Russian-led forces in eastern Ukraine. It quickly earned controversy as a place that accepted open neo-Nazis into its ranks. And that black sun, once again, I see it on Azov's patches, being worn by soldiers and even used as decoration in one of their social centers. I lost count on how many black sun patches and tattoos I saw. I've seen it on stickers on lampposts around Kiev. That is a direct quote from this ABC article about the Christchurch Mosque shooter. And this is an image of the Christchurch Mosque shooter's body armor. And again, this image, as the Washington Post reports, and this image you can find for yourselves. Look it up in the Radical Media article I just showed you, which I'll show you again if you want all of this referenced. But that is the Christchurch Mosque shooter, the terrorist's body armor. And in the middle of that body armor, you can see that rune. That is the black sun symbolism. So now I've presented, or we have presented, two examples of directly how Azov, with their symbolism, the black sun, have inspired mass murder on different ends of the world. The Buffalo shooter in the United States of America, where he openly basically targeted anyone of a darker hue and complexion to himself, and the Christchurch Mosque massacre, where the neo-Nazi went into a mosque and shot Muslims as they were in prayer. And if memory serves me correctly, around 50 innocent people lost their lives. So we've shown you in both of those terrorist attacks that they both raised and appropriated, mind you, because this black sun symbol, like the swastika, is an ancient rune that has been appropriated by the far right and the white supremacists. But these two appropriated that symbol in their false belief. It was a false belief that it was a white supremacist symbol, because as of the battalion in Ukraine have also appropriated that symbol and have made it falsely their white supremacist symbol. So that's, you can see now a direct line between the Christchurch mosque shooter and the Buffalo shooter and Azov in Ukraine. So to square all that circle back again, what we're saying is that's the danger of what happens when our security services, like they appear to have done with Boneface that we showed you at the beginning, send radicalized individuals to Ukraine, as he said himself in the video clip that we showed you, the CIA are the ones that sent him, and they get radicalized over there and they export that radicalized Nazi ideology when they return home. And it has the knock-on effect as what you saw there with those Nazis in Florida, which we're going to show you again. This is the chickens coming home to roost.
Going on right now. Are you going to vote in 2024? What do you think is going to happen with
My
all
vote is useless. I think Biden's better than Trump because he sends rockets to Ukraine.
In support of Ukraine, you mean?
Hell Ukraine. Hell Azov.
Christopher, there's a...
There we are, bro. Tell me what you think of that.
Okay, well, where do we start? Do we start with the parallels that... once again, we've got short-term thinking going on.
Yep.
So let's talk about the formalizing of a methodology. So we had that word formalizing that was used during the Tim Pool interview.
Yeah.
And formalizing is a very interesting word because we go from the perception of something as amateur and fringe to being something that is accepted. Yeah, that concept of if it's printed, you believe it, or that was the idea pre the digital age, that if you printed it and you sent it through, people thought it was going to happen because we're trained in that way. Yeah, if it's got the right type font, the right right way that it's displayed. Now, the reason I'm explaining it like that is there was another word that was used during the interview, which was perception.
Yeah.
Now, what this relates to is, and the reason Maajid and myself, our experience is so relevant to this is because we saw this happen through the 80s with an anti-hero that was created through the tabloids and the broadsheets and the Western media by the name of Osama bin Laden.
Precisely.
Osama bin Laden was what would be considered in that time, a guerrilla fighter against the Soviets. And then what happens is when you've unleashed the monster and you can't reel him back in again, and you realize that you've created a group of psychopaths that aren't actually functioning from a perspective of bringing peace, but are actually addicted to an end of the world concept of the ends justifies the means. And remember, what we mean by the ends justifies the means is the fact that each one of these groups, the end point is some nirvana. The end point is some point of me and my group living in peace. But in order to get to that peace, that's all about love, that's all about community, we have to kill them. Yeah. One of the questions, one of the questions that I've always asked the group leaders, and we're talking about group leaders for groups like Al-Qaeda and IS. So we're talking about the cell leaders has been, so how many people does how many people have to die in your means before it justifies that endpoint? And who has to die? Is it my child? Is it your sister's child? Now, the problem that we get here is that people's mindset and their memory and their level of comprehension functions from a very short-term perspective, even though the way that we perceive ourselves to be planners, to think of ourselves as strategic and have determined ends that we're going to reach. But that isn't actually how we function. We function from a very short-term perspective. That includes the geopolitics point of view. But I mean, what we're seeing right now, even with all of this, is all fallout of bad international decisions.
Yeah.
Now, the argument that's made for Ukraine and the Azov battalion is the fact that, well, we have to fight the Russians, and isn't the best, aren't zealots the best that we can employ to fight the Russians? Yeah, what we've got here is we've got a group that's akin to white jihadists in a sense. Yeah, the Aryan Brotherhood.
Meanwhile, though, the argument they don't apply that same argument to actual jihadism. So
the thing with it suits them when it suits them. Remember, with the crippling of the Soviets, they're the ones that actually, when we say they, we're talking about the infrastructure, the Euro-American alliance, if you want. We always still refer to ourselves as the Allies or the West, as if it's a good guy lumping that's always been that's existed since fighting the Nazis and then had to fight the Soviets. But the problem with this is that during that period in fighting the Soviets that a new ideology is created. Now with neo-Nazism itself, what we've got is an actual new ideology. This ideology itself has been formed and structured over a certain period worldwide. And the problem with this is once it started becoming formalized and recognized itself as an entity, it brings in intelligent individuals like the ones we just saw that were interviewed in that interview. The guy with the obvious high blood pressure from taking steroids, and his tattooed imbeciles behind him who literally couldn't string the sentence together because the adrenaline of the interview was taking him so much. But the point is with this, that what it gives is, and this is the dangerous point with this, and this is the point that everyone falls victim to, from the most intellectual to the most imbecilic, which is extrinsic attachment, belonging to a group. And it's the most simplistic methodology, but believe it or not, because it gives you it supplies the human being with a need. And this is the thing, Maajid, that what people don't understand is this isn't people that are leaving the mainstream, because this is always the assessment. The assessment that's made is this is some loser that's left the mainstream. But when you've analyzed and worked within this system, and I've worked both within the sphere of jihadism, but also the right wing. So what we call reciprocal radicalization. And what you find with this is the real, what I call the actual social group. And what I mean by this is often when one of these individuals is arrested, the officer that's dealing with them, whether it's a probation officer or a forensic psychologist or even a police officer, the person they're speaking to represents a bigger actual social group than the one that is interviewing them. Being a utility within the system doesn't make you part of a social group, but being part of an extrinsically attached group, this is where groups like even cults like the Jehovah's Witnesses and groups like this, when they come and knock on your door, you think to yourself, oh, they're quite courageous. How come I wouldn't go and knock on someone's door, because they've just come from a hall where they're sat down with at least 150 people that will sit there and share hot chocolate. That actual social connection is such a basic human need. You don't find it on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But we know that if you offer people social acceptance, even in parallel to food or sex, social acceptance is such a big thing that to be part of that social group, people will leave all of the comforts to go and join to go and join a monastery and be part of a cause. Do you see what I mean? This is something that is empirically proven. Now, the problem is once you've got that, now this is the part to think about. Once you've got that, the idea of validation becomes very interesting now. Now you've got this group that you're part of. And remember what we talked about, Maajid, where each and every single one of these groups is suffering from what? Cognitive dissonance. Yep. So, and people are going to say, oh, I'm exclusive. I'm excluded from that group. Oh, yeah, is that why you're going in to do your extra 24-hour shift that you're going to put in because you need to get paid the overtime because you're not going to pay the bills at the end of the month? Yeah, guess what? That's your cognitive dissonance coming in. Yeah, if you look at it, how many days have you lost? How much time have you lost? But let's get back to what we're talking about here. Because what we're talking about here is if any action that you don't want to do, but you think you have to do to fulfill something or to fulfill a need is there to fulfill some determined end, needs to be done. That is zealotry. There's a form of zealousness that comes into back up the belief system that you're coming from. Now, that zealous act often comes with two rewards. One is the thing that you do to get the reward that you want, which might be getting paid, or the other reward now is validation, is recognition. Yep. The concept of martyrdom hasn't got so much to do with the fact that the person actually believes they're going somewhere. There's two levels with this. Another level of this is the validation factor for the illusory idea of the self. Does this make sense, Maajid? So the idea of the self is validated. Now, what happens with this is once you get that, it becomes very dangerous, because the New Zealand shooter, I mean, strangely enough, at that period, I refused to watch these things, Maajid. I've never, in all the time I was dealing with frontline ISIS, I never watched an execution video ever. I never watched one.
We used to have to hire people specifically to sit there all day and watch all of those propaganda videos for the purpose of briefings. Yeah. And eventually, I remember I won't reveal who they were, but it took a toll on their mental health. It was difficult for them. Yeah,
I mean, this is the thing, Maajid. This is where the accident happened for myself. So when the New Zealand shooting happened, at that time, I was sent a video through, but there was no label on it. So I thought, with us, the training videos and everything that's coming through. But for some reason, the timing of this was...
So you accidentally opened it?
I accidentally opened it, and because you can't tell what's going on at first. It only dawned on me, because you have to remember all the news was happening as that. With our contacts, that we get footage before it's even released on the news. Yeah. And it still scars me to this point where you're watching it.
You watched him live streaming his murders in the mosque.
Yeah.
On Facebook.
On Facebook, yeah. I got.
Can I tell a little story on this very example? So, obviously, both of us come from that particular background where we used to do this stuff. So I flew out to Facebook headquarters a couple of years before this incident and met with the global head of security at Facebook in their San Francisco, California-based headquarters. And Harris, he came with me.
Yeah.
And I said to their global head of security and a whole bunch of people that were around me at the time, I said, if you guys don't figure something out, you're going to end up with a terrorist atrocity broadcast live on your platform. Fair to say, as you can see, even since my days trying to say forecast stuff that's going to happen on Joe Rogan, it still doesn't land. People still, for some reason, after reality staring at them in the face, don't see it. So they laughed at me, pretty much didn't take it seriously, really didn't pursue that conversation any further with us. We left thinking, what the hell was that? They didn't really take us seriously. And of course, what you've just described, the footage you've just seen, subsequently happened. And
the thing with this was, Maajid, it's like, when you're sat there and I mean, the thing that you're seeing with this is you're seeing someone who's walking around with a gun as if it's a computer game. And you realize that what you've just seen is someone shoot a child.
Yeah.
What you've seen is people huddled in the corner of the room, in the corners of the rooms, and they're just getting shot.
It's demonic possession.
Yeah. The point is with this, that this is what happens. But the level of dehumanization that comes with this, because once again, when we're discussing something, the person who's listening is filing it in one of two places. This is important, or I don't really give a crap. This doesn't affect me. Yeah. But the problem is that this is where that idea of understanding that there is ramifications for every stone that is thrown into the river.
Yeah.
That those ripples, even if you don't see them, will eventually reach you. Now, the problem is, what happens with this is that you have this mindset, which is very interesting, which is completely illogical, which is a mindset whereby if it affects my group, it affects me.
Yeah.
But the problem with this is the trick that's been played on you is this concept of the group. And even the geniuses that we saw there getting interviewed, where they're there with their little group. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got them say, oh, who am I voting for? Yeah, still red and blue. The red and blue option's still there in front of them. And they're still coming from this point of view of Biden, because Biden's sending missiles to Ukraine. Yeah. But this concept that you're even the individual, even this like so-called warrior for his cause is part of what's going on within the status quo. Is part of that functionality. Is part of that. That the choices he's making is to be validated within that status quo. These aren't revolutionaries. These aren't that. When we're talking about real change, when we're talking about reality, the problem we've got here is we've got people that are validating to the people next to them, and what they perceive as real or formal or powerful. Remember, we talked about that word perception is still within the status quo structure. So what we've got with this is the intersectional movements that you're part of are doing what? They're not creating the Gandhis or the Nelson Mandelas, are they, Maajid? Or the Malcolm X's. They're creating a parody, a false revolutionary, something that a facade that you can present, like we see with, like the point that I've always made with this, which is like we've seen with the jihadists, like we've seen with these right-wing groups, they're all distractions from what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is now we've got the militant LGBTQ, ABCDEFG, whatever groups that have taken on, once again, the same militancy. So the militancy that we saw first creep into what I call the jihad activism movements, which back in the 90s were people that were actually that were British, that were Muslim, that the people around us, Maajid, who had been influenced by Malcolm X, who wanted to go and fight the evil of the Soviet Empire, and who came back and still had the British identity. We saw that movement get hijacked by what? A politicized understanding, a dogmatic religious understanding, because we went from what I call the philosophical stance of humanity and goodness and a collective understanding. Because remember, in those that, as we said, after World War One, when you had World War One, people were sending their kids into the countryside to be taken care of by people they didn't know. And then even through the 60s, we had this idea of the brotherhood with humanity. And then even with Malcolm X coming back from Mecca, we had the concept of humanity, and and with Martin Luther King, and there's philosophical stances that are more about unity and more about humanity. Yeah. And then this is where people have to start connecting the dots now, where what you start seeing happen now is that we have this movement now where with corporate interest, the shutting down of the fraternities, because you have to remember, if you've got fraternal understanding in one place, if you're a Teamster with Jimmy Hoffa, for example, if you're a Teamster with Jimmy Hoffa and you're part of the Brotherhood of Teamsters, that brotherhood also echoes over to your everyday interaction on the street. So whether you're a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian, whoever you meet, there's a level of, because you've got an experience of brotherhood here, that brotherhood also moves over into the way you'll behave with other people. Remember the
by definition, you know the parameters of how to behave brotherly with one person. You're not going to know how to do it with other people.
And this is the thing, Maajid, that remember we talked about the idea of the magic that we first saw in the mosques.
Yeah.
In the early days, when because both me and Maajid came from underclass white backgrounds where we had the brotherhood of the communities around us, but the extreme hyper-violent xenophobia of the people around, outside of that perimeter. Yeah, so you'd have the love of the underclass community that you were growing up in, but then directly outside of that, it was a hyper-xenophobic, racist violence that we faced. Yeah. But what happens is from there, because of that localized understanding, that understanding whereby we couldn't take on the idea of us and them, because we'd grown up within them in a sense, hadn't we? And we saw ourselves, we'd grown up in the best of them, if you want to talk about from a British community perspective, but we'd also seen the worst of them when it comes from a level of hyper-violence. But what I'm talking about here is to explain something about this brotherhood concept. So when me and Maajid visited those mosques and we got to see, remember we talked about, Maajid, people of different colors eating out of the same plate. Yeah. Children running around the room, and parents didn't have to worry, because if anyone knows the 80s and the 90s, you didn't have this. You didn't have the predatory pedophilia that you have now, where you can't let your child run around a building. But in those days, it was still something magical to see that brotherhood. Now, what happens is when you start shutting down the fraternities. So what happened during the 80s was that during the Reagan era and the Thatcher era, we saw the shutting down of the trade unions. We saw the So we're talking about from a work perspective, the shutting down of the trade unions. But what we also saw was the other thing that started happening here, where slowly but surely you started
suppression of community everywhere.
And this is why when we see these groups, so hopefully everyone's understood
so
what we're talking.
Basically, so everyone's followed the thread we've just gone through, just to make sure everyone's understanding, because sometimes with you have to listen till you get to the end of your point.
Exactly, yeah.
See how that thread is strung together. But just so in case some people have lost your train of thought, I'm going to summarize it as follows: is you looked at those red blood Nazis in Florida and you said what they were attracted to was this sense of community, which you cannot extinguish in human beings. And ultimately, any community that any of these radicalized individuals join is still larger than the community of the so-called experts who are studying them from up high, who don't really belong in any community, but rather work for a machine. So those communities that these people are drawn to, which is what makes them susceptible to radicalization, you're saying that that's going to vent in the direction of radicalization if actual proper communities in our, for example, neighborhoods are suppressed. And that's what you've observed has happened from charting the course from the 80s to now, that actual communities in neighborhoods, whether they be work communities such as trade unions, or whether they be religious communities or even just neighborhoods, have been suppressed. Individuals have become more and more atomized, and so they seek out that lost sense of community in these radicalized sorts of groups, which our state, by the way, is encouraging on both fronts.
Exact. And the point with this thing now, Maajid, is that because we're dealing with this constant, but remember, what people don't see outside of this is we're sitting around a table discussing, okay, which area are we going to hit? How are we going to get there into the actual sphere? When I say the actual sphere, so the physical sphere in a sense, yeah? Point being with this, that when you have these actual groups that exist, what ends up happening is that you have to remember the person who is vulnerable within that local area is drawn to that. Yeah. And these groups are increasing. They're not decreasing. Yeah, I've got documents here. Well, the document will be probably a decade old now, but it was from Wandsworth Prison, Margin, which was to do with the Eastern European gangs that were there. And once again, what do we get? We get this Nazi symbolism there as well. Yeah. So you've got very dangerous organized ideologies that are then perceived from that formal group perspective. The formal group perspective is very interesting. It's like if I say, come and join my gang, and you say, well, how long has your gang been about? Have you got a website? Have you got an Instagram page? Yeah, the idea of formality is something that is very attractive to people. And when people take on that, when people get access to something where they can validate themselves within certain rules, it's those rules that we get seen playing out. It's like that the imbeciles that we saw there, Maajid, how do they validate themselves? They're going to want to validate themselves through acts of violence. Yeah, that's the language that's there. The Islamic extremists that we've dealt with, how did they validate themselves? Now you've got the idea of the expert in the ideology, and then you've got the one who will validate himself through violence.
Now, in your framework that you've just, for everyone there, you've just articulated, draw it back to my introduction monologue and how what you've just said there, tie it directly to what people saw unfold in Florida and our experience of dealing with this stuff in the past, and to our government's policies towards Azov in Ukraine.
Well, what you're seeing here, guys, is we're seeing what's actually being demonstrated to you here is, and we've talked about this before, which is the national theatre play perspective. You see, previously, if you had what was called a subversive group be created in a region that was cared about, so if we're talking about in the capital, there was a communist group or there was a right-wing group, those groups were neutralized by the police. Yeah, even from the perspective of the eco warriors in the 80s were neutralized by the Metropolitan Police's flying squad, through undercover work. That was what used to happen. Now what we've seen happen is we've seen the empowering of different intersectional ideologies to get to an end point with corporate interest.
Such as, for example, the end point in Ukraine. So
Yeah.
corporates funding that war, the military industrial complex funding that war, raising taxes for that war, turning to its corporate partners in corporatist media and asking them to cheerlead for that war, all for the purposes of serving a specific end in what's to be achieved with that war in Ukraine, profit and what have you, and other such ends. The ideology of Nazism is being used. People are being radicalized to serve those corporate ends.
And while creating a distraction for those in the working classes or those that from the middle down to the underclass, whereby you have those that you can blame. We've seen this increase in the blaming of immigrants and of Muslims, and it's very interesting when you look at V for Vendetta, Maajid. Yeah, by Alan Moore. As if it wasn't so obvious that, even within that you've got this point of England survives, and how do they survive? By getting rid of the immigrants, the Muslims, the homosexuals. So you have all of these people that are quite conveniently put into intersectional bubbles. And when you go and sit down with people, you find that the person themselves put part of their identity, the way that they see themselves, is part of an intersectional bubble. And even when you expose the absurdity and the cognitive dissonance that the individual has, it doesn't really matter because the payoff. Remember what we talked about?
Just finding that sense of community in that intersectional bubble. And
it's such a massive thing. It's what you're looking for. The point is with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can take with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can take the narcissist and he can look at that and say, okay, I need to fulfill this. I need to fulfill this. But when it actually comes down to understanding the fact that the human being's functionality on a social level is so strong that if you put an individual in solitary confinement, they will stop creating neurons and start creating stem cells. Literally so your brain will structure something that is waiting to structure itself into a neuron, into neurological pathway. So it creates stem cells. They say on standby for interaction. So it's constantly creating stem cells.
You could say it craves it.
It craves it, and it needs it. Now, the problem with that is that's when we can get into delusional understanding, because they've done the experiments. You get the subject and you put individuals around him who are part of the experiment. All of the individuals in the room are then shown some long lines and some short lines. And they're asked which one is the long line, which one is the short line. If all the rest of the individuals pick the long line as the short line, the subject, who doesn't know he's the subject,
will follow the crowd.
Yeah, will follow the crowd.
And pick the short line as the long line.
Because group psychosis. But group psychosis is actually rational, because group psychosis is how you survive. Let's not get this wrong and start looking at the human being as some AI with an algorithm working towards what is mathematically correct. The human being, in being human, wants to connect and be part of the social group. Hence, ridiculous things that you can believe in. But you don't think that those guys there, our geniuses that we just saw interviewed in Florida there, you don't think that when they look at each other, they're validated, that they feel a sense of individuality and purpose that's validated by the imbecile next to you, hence the tattoos, hence the way that
this brings us back to the danger of incrementally over the years, since the 50s and beyond, through the 60s, up until the 80s, and then, of course, fast forward at pace, the dangers of destroying those communities that used to exist.
Yeah.
Because once you destroy those communities, these young men will seek it out. To your point, they will seek it out in these radicalized organizations that provide an answer to that craving. And that's a craving, back to your example with the neural pathways in solitary confinement, it's a craving that even the brain cannot rid itself of, the craving for a sense of belonging and community and company. So I think that's important to recognize that our lifestyle itself needs to adjust so that it isn't the case that it becomes so easy to send a whole bunch of people elsewhere. But meanwhile, we've got a government policy that seems to be deliberately doing so as well.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, isn't it? That are we going to accept that it's government policy? Because this is the thing, Maajid, that we've sat in those rooms where you bring up the list and you bring up a map and you start going, okay, guys, look, you've got all of this happening. And in order to deal with this, you have to remember our word, Maajid, full spectrum approach.
Yep.
And what was the problem with the government approach, Maajid? You remember us sitting there, me sitting there with you going, this is the way we need to approach this. This is the way we need, and we were sitting there, we were looking at it and realizing at a certain point that, you know what, they're not going to go for this.
We were flogging a dead horse, and that our presence any longer in that flogging of the dead horse would be a waste of energy.
Yeah, and the point is now that what we're seeing with this is that what we've got going on with this is you see a very clear self. You see what they've done is they've created an individual that validates himself by his ability to from a short-term perspective satiate appetite. So what ends up happening is there's an idea of this: you fulfill the utility at work, then you satiate appetite. But the satiating of appetite is, if we look at it, it's akin to this concept of Pharaoh when he had the slaves. So this is there they're from that biblical context as well, which is, what were the slaves allowed to do? They were allowed to fornicate openly.
Yeah,
they were given. Remember when even if we want to look at this from an analogous perspective. Yep. So let's look at. I like to look at the stories from a moral truth analogous perspective. So anyone who's listening doesn't have to go, okay, I need to be religious to understand this. They can understand it from a behavioral therapeutic perspective. Yeah. But there's this concept of the manna being sent from heaven, which is this food that's sent to Bani Israel, the slave,
the tribe of Israel.
Yeah, the tribes of Israel in the desert, and they're getting this food from heaven and they're eating it, and then all of a sudden they're like, you know what, we want onions, we want lentils, and it's interesting as well, Maajid, because when you start looking at what they're asking for, it's like prison food, high carb prison food that they've been given. They've been given as slaves in Egypt, and fornication,
high carb food,
all
encouraged.
So literally,
the delusion of freedom, because you're allowed to fornicate and eat whatever you like, and not have much regulation when it comes to the social, let's call it social debauchery. That gives the illusion that there is a lack of slavery when in fact these are slaves we're talking about.
Yeah, and they're living
from ancient Egypt to our lack of community today. To say, let's not be fooled. The fact that we have the illusion of the so-called freedom to be able to behave licentiously or to behave in a certain way promiscuously or to eat whatever we like doesn't take away from the fact, just as in Pharaoh's time, that those freedoms being present do not remove the fact that they were slaves. What are we enslaved to? If there's no community and therefore no sense of higher spirit or essence or moral aspiration which governs a community, if there's nothing there that we're looking up to, which is what would happen if there's no community, what are we becoming enslaved to?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, that what you become if the human brain is structured in a way, Maajid, that you've got the needs of the first environment that you're the pilot of, so breathing, food, and mating, so to speak, to spread your genes. Yeah,
survival.
Yeah, the basic, and then above that you have the limbic system, the mammalian factor now of the group connection. Yeah. But in order to actually get to what they call higher consciousness, there's a level of empathy and alleviating suffering. It's a very interesting point, and a good demonstration of this is when you give up the chair for the old lady or you open the door for someone, and there's an immediate reward which is there and then, but you don't attribute it to anything. Yeah, it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
That state of compassion. Yeah. So what it's talking about is there is this mysterious reward system that we're wired into. Once again, like the stem cell.
If that's removed, and if community is removed, what is it in your view that we become enslaved to?
You become the algorithm, don't you, Maajid? The algorithm of, remember we talked about the algorithm of appetite, the one that's chasing the carrot, but on the way to the carrot, that you're eating everything else. Do you see what I mean? There's every part of the appetite is never satiated, is it? Yeah, the Epstein's Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Every single point that's brought up is this idea of if you've got Jimmy Savile, where he's going around and you're seeing this lizard-like character. Remember, that's how he was described as well. People that knew Jimmy Savile described him as a reptile, which is very interesting, isn't it? Because what did we talk about, Martin? We talked about breathing, food, and fornication. Yeah. And what is this guy doing? He's got the keys to psychiatric
wards,
psychiatric units where he's going in and abusing people. He's abusing children. He's doing all of this. But is he doing it from a group perspective? No. So the question you've asked is, the person becomes minimized down to this individual. And this is why it's so dangerous. This is why when you watch your soaps, yeah, there's you've got the fashion nowadays where you've got this glorification of the self. And the system knows that the glorification of the self can only last so long, a maximum a decade and a half, unless you want to go, God forbid, you want to go the Madonna route where you start turning into something inhuman.
Yeah.
But even in between all of this, you have this point of everything that can be appropriated from this idea of, oh, I'm part of this spiritual movement that glorifies the self. Because what we're talking about here is we're talking about philosophical stances that then allow you to see that this isn't the other, this isn't them, this is you. Yeah. The idea that if there is any suffering left in the world, that if there's one person suffering, so say for example, if there was a man who is living in Austria, Maajid, yeah, a failed artist, for example, living in Austria, who is begging for some money, and he sees people walk past him, and he looks at them and he goes, and he makes a judgment on maybe he's begging for money. He looks at them and he goes, oh, it's because of these Jews that I'm in the situation that I'm in. And then somehow when he's in Germany, he finds that he has a skill as an orator. Yeah. And climbs up the ladder of a political group. And when he climbs up that ladder, he decides to grow himself a silly mustache. Yeah. What does that individual end up doing? But he started off as just the beggar outside. Yeah. But the point is with this, that what we get is we're not talking about people coming to the right conclusions. The right conclusion is always looking at the entire system and going, well, actually, if people in Niger are still being charged on a colonial tax, that, yeah, you can look at and you can look and see bambinos as the Italian, remember, it's the Italian prime minister's words, not my words. The bambino in the mine who is mining gold and then having to send it to France.
That was the Giorgia Meloni's video we played on Warrior Creed. Yeah.
Now the point.
Yeah, go on. Finish your thought.
The point being with this, Maajid, that understanding that even these imbeciles that we've just seen in Florida. Oh, sorry, these intelligent guys. I'm framing it different. Yeah. So our little group of geniuses that we just saw in Florida, yeah, strangely enough, they're from an appropriated, twisted environmental understanding. Yeah. But then what that environmental understanding is, the trick of that is to say, my group. When you have to understand your group is everyone. You cut your finger, you bleed. You cut down all the trees, you suffocate to death.
That, by the way, also applies to the people that those Florida chaps are rebelling against as well. This is the problem here, is it's got, if you're going to get to this point where it's like, I feel something in common with everyone. Yeah. And everyone needs to start thinking like that as well. And part of the challenge here is what we're dealing with is people that deliberately encourage the Hegelian dialect, where they're encouraging this conflict between groups so that we don't look up and look at exactly what's going on while we're distracted fighting with all these other groups. But on that note, we're going to move to the second topic, bro, because we've only got 10 minutes left. And as if viewers will remember that last week we raised the conversation that's been written up in Radical Media as that image you just see there on your screen. Blue check is blue hair, Two-Face Elon Musk's WEF handmaid, and Linda Yaccarino, who's the CEO now of the platform formerly known as Twitter, promises to censor lawful but awful content on Twitter. So that article you can see from August the 12th on Radical Media. We based our live stream last week discussing that and showed some videos, if you remember. Sorry, this wasn't last week, was it? It was before the primaries, but we showed some videos, if you remember, of the ADL claiming that they would pressure Twitter to shadow ban and censor certain accounts. So since that conversation, this is what has happened. Elon Musk, for whatever reason, has decided to start a public spat with the ADL. Now, if you recall, in our reporting, we were showing by an undercover reporter named Kyle, which we showed on Warrior Creed, that he had captured ADL staff saying that they were working with the platform formerly known as Twitter to continue to shadow ban certain accounts. Now, even that, if you remember, even that phrase we've just shown you there, lawful but awful content, we demonstrated on Radical Media using the work of some of these independent journalists that we've just referenced. We demonstrated that phrase, that Twitter would shadow ban lawful but awful content, that Linda Yaccarino admitted to doing recently, that phrase came directly from the ADL. And we showed a tweet by Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, using that exact phrase, lawful but awful content. And then in chronological order, we showed Elon Musk using it. And then in chronological order, we showed how Linda Yaccarino, his WEF handmaid and CEO, said that would now be the policy of Twitter. So it appears to us and all the independent journalists that were reporting on this, that this lawful but awful policy that the CEO of the platform formerly known as Twitter has said is their official policy came from the EDL. And so it's incredibly strange now that Elon Musk's response to all of this chatter appears to be to try and distance himself from the EDL. So he's made 2 announcements on the platform formerly known as Twitter that demonstrate that he's now, for whatever reason, trying to distance himself from the ADL and from everything that's been revealed about how it was the ADL that had a platform of censorship and shadow banning that is still ongoing on the platform formerly known as Twitter. But here is Musk saying that he's going to, if you can see there, the account Libs of TikTok reporting there, dear Elon, please consider releasing all communications and providing full transparency on the ADL and all other organizations who've posted to censor certain accounts on Twitter X. Sincerely, thousands of users who have been suspended and silenced and shadow banned. So you can see that the concern is shadow ban. And then what Elon Musk does there at the bottom is that is suggested by Libs of TikTok in the thread. It continues that he should release all the data. And he says at the end there, great point. A giant data dump would clear the air. And that's right at the end. You can see at the bottom of the image there, Elon Musk saying a giant data dump would clear the air. So that's one thing he's threatened, a data dump of all the data that the platform formerly known as Twitter has on the ADL, which I presume he means all of their direct messages with each other on Twitter about the accounts that they're subsequently going to lobby Twitter to then silence, shadow ban, and suspend. Now, something to remember that's really interesting with regards to that potential data dump is when Elon Musk purchased the platform formerly known as Twitter, he became the private owner of that platform. So every single DM ADL members were sending each other on the platform formerly known as Twitter about who to ban and who not to ban. And we wonder if we're among those named because we are shadow banned. All of those messages Elon Musk now owns. So when he threatens a data dump, he owns all of that data. Twitter, or the platform formerly known as, could publicly release all the ADL messages and show precisely how they've been talking about who to ban and when to ban them and how to ban them. So that was threat number 1. But here is the second threat. Musk has now said that he plans to sue the Anti-Defamation League. So he's saying to clear our platform's name on the matter of anti-Semitism, it looks like we have no choice but to file a defamation lawsuit against the Anti-Defamation League. Oh, the irony. Now, you know, it's incredibly interesting to see that since us and other independent commentators drew attention to the fact that that the platform formerly known as Twitter and Musk were working with the ADL to shadow ban and silence voices such as ours, since then, Mr. Musk has decided that he wants to distance himself for that allegation, and you can see the ensuing drama and theater that you can judge for yourselves. But as always, we're going to keep monitoring this because despite attempts, whether it's by the platform formerly known as Twitter and Musk, or whether it's by the ADL, our voices are suppressed. We know that. We are on social media shadow ban, but as we say, our signal will always be louder than their noise, and we will carry on regardless. Usman, it's 4:30. We've been speaking for an hour and a half. I'll throw it back to you for any last words before we end the show for today.
Well, I just saw that lawful but awful content thing, and I just thought, you know what, we're gonna have to use that, aren't we?
Yeah, we can own it, right?
So we're gonna have to own it. So.
I mean, it's important to say at this stage that all the lovely new graphics you see around you, Usman designed those for this show and does the intro and outro music for this show and the mixes for that. And you're about to. There's a new intro. Is there? Is it ready?
Well, not ready yet. It's not ready. It's still in the lab right now. So
okay. So what we'll soon, guys, for those who like our live stream, as well as the lovely new graphics you see around us, we'll soon have a new intro outro as well, hopefully. But it's still hip hop, right, Usman?
Always still hip hop. Yeah. So
all right. So were they your last words? That's it. Yeah.
But last words are always go hug someone. So give someone a hug. Get out of your little individuality bubble. And stop joining Nazi groups and jihadist groups, and let's get some community rolling. Go have a cup of tea with someone.
Yep. All right. Until next Tuesday, 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. EST. This has been Warrior Creed, bringing you the latest of current events that unfold during the week. And I believe, Usman, I spoke to you about this yesterday. I believe, folks, we're going to see a bit of an unraveling or a apocalypse or a unrevealing or lifting of the veil that's going to happen. And this Nazi thing is one of them, as an example where the entire thing you can demonstrate is being funded by the state. But more such things are going to begin to happen in September. It's going to be, I think, quite a hot month for the unveiling of things.
Yeah.
And you'll be seeing a lot more post these sorts of revelations, similar to those false flags, the security state being involved in stuff they shouldn't really be involved in, and people finding their voice outside of that structure, and finally coming into their own, being able to criticize all of this from a sense of community. So stay with us. We're going to be continue to cover these topics as well, but we'll be back next Tuesday for Warrior Creed, same time on Rumble, 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. EST. But for now, thank you very much for tuning in.
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriornews.
Damn, that shit was dope.